Hi, everybody. This is Mike, and today we're going to do things just a little bit different. Instead of more of a monologue, me talking to the camera, I've brought on a guest, and I've brought on Conrad de la Torre. Conrad, thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike.
Those of you who don't know Conrad has been in the almond business, more specifically the nursery side of the industry, for 50 years.
52 to be exact.
Okay, so Conrad really started on the ground level, on the labor side, right? Budding, tying, doing a lot of the work in the field.
Right.
And then you've really kind of progressed into a sales role and then being a partner in the nursery company. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you are also an almond grower.
Right.
Okay. So thank you, Conrad, for coming. And today what we're going to talk about really are our observations on what we've seen so far on the 25 crop bloom, the quality of it, and really more about our opinion about why we believe we're seeing what we're seeing. I don't think I should say the intent here is not at all to give a crop estimate or a number on the 25 crop. Again, it's really to give our best opinion on kind of what's happened and why we think we're seeing what we're seeing.
Correct.
So I'll maybe start with kind of how we produced the 24 crop. So the 24 crop was produced on about 1,383,000 bearing acres.
Correct.
The highest bearing acreage California's really ever seen, and most likely the highest bearing acreage California will ever see.
Right.
We think the acreage will probably be flat at best going into the 25 crop.
Correct.
Bloom conditions for the 24 crop really were ideal.
Perfect.
Right?
Yes.
It was clear skies, temperatures were good. Really, there was no question.
Right.
Right. Financial constraints probably were still there from growers in the 24 crop, right? I mean, people were struggling, maybe cutting budgets back quite a bit, fertility, things like that. But again, you had great bloom and you had the largest bearing acreage we'd seen, and we produced a crop of 2.67, arguably.
Right.
Right? Well below people's expectations.
Absolutely.
So kind of towards the tail end of the it really wasn't the tail end, but it was June and July, right before harvest really started for the 24 crop, we saw some pretty extreme weather.
Extremely, very hot.
Right. So what we're going to do is really kind of dive into what we saw in June and July of 2024 and maybe try to draw some parallels from that time period to kind of what we're seeing today. Right. Maybe some of the effects of that heat. And to give a little bit of context, I think, to how hot it was, I'm just going to read a little bit. I wrote a little report internally. We'll probably release it a little bit, but just for context, I'll read a little bit of this.
Okay.
The heat wave that occurred in June 2024 was significant, with temperatures well above the average. This time period was likely among the top 5 hottest Junes on record. July 2024 was even more extreme. It was one of the hottest Julys on record, surpassing temperatures from 1931 to 2021 in several key cities of the Central Valley. This makes July 2024 not just a record setter, but potentially the hottest July in historical data for this region. Specific locations like Merced, Madera, Fresno, and Bakersfield all saw temperatures that were unprecedented, with daily highs often above 110 degrees and sometimes nearing 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Comparatively, before the 2000s, while there were hot summers, the consistency and the intensity of the heat in 24 would be exceptional, even compared to historical heat waves. The 1930s, often cited for its Dust Bowl heat, might have had similar peak temperatures, but the duration and widespread nature of the 2024 heat wave were likely more intense. So it was probably the hottest June and July we've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Okay. And it wasn't just about the temperatures, but it really was about the duration, how many days it was hot like that. And I was reading a few articles before we came on here, and it was talking about the average temperature. So basically the high versus the low. And even that average was some of the highest daily averages we had seen, especially strung together for a duration.
Correct.
So if you could maybe just walk us through kind of the physiology of an almond tree during that time period and maybe the effects it has on kind of what we're seeing today.
Well, kind of starting mid-June to late June and July. I mean, from the nursery side of it, I mean, we had to send our crew home right about 10:30 in the morning. It was that hot already because you can only work them up to 95 degrees. So you could see it started very early in the morning and stretched out to late afternoon. That's the longest I've ever seen it go for such a long time. And the key factor that I believe in July would be that as the tree is forming its fruit buds or bud formation, it was so hot. And I used to hang around with a gentleman that kind of gave me some training, and he also used to tell me that trees would generally shut down if the temperatures exceeded a certain amount. Right. And I was very concerned just seeing these temperatures go so high for so long that I often wondered how this was going to affect our bud set.
Right.
I started looking at stuff in December of 24 after, and you heard me talking about it quite a bit.
December of 25.
25.
Yeah.
No, December of 24. Okay. Right, looking at bud set, you know, and you could usually see the kind of fruit set that you have on an almond tree. And I started seeing a lot of light bud sets, especially in nonpareil, Monterey's, the older trees especially. And so I got a little concerned about that. Started thinking, wonder if the heat had a big impact. And I do believe that based on what you're reading here, that it is correct. I mean, I think it really affected the bud differentiation at the time, and it really weakened a lot of these, especially the older trees.
But walk me through kind of what the tree is doing in June and July. Maybe if you could start at the root system, right? Soil temperatures, right? What that does. The research that I was looking at was, anything that's living, any of that root system that's living within the first foot of soil, right? And soil temperatures exceeding 95 degrees really starts to restrict nutrient uptake and things like that. Can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Absolutely. And that's what I was told, that most of your root systems or the tree was shut down at a certain temperature, especially your ambient temperatures being 105 to 110. The tree's just basically not doing anything. It's on a survival mode. Because
the tree's suffocating a little bit?
It's suffocating. So it's just trying to survive that heat. And so even if you have a lot of water, the tree's not uptaking it because it's just trying to survive. So it causes some kind of a suffocation effect.
Yeah.
And so the important part of that is that it's forming its fruit buds for the following year. And I think all that had an effect. There's just no other reason that I would think that it had an impact on what we are seeing today.
So June and July, you have the 24 crop on the tree.
Yes.
Okay. And at the same time, that tree it's on the new growth that the tree is differentiating between a leaf or a flower bud.
Right,
correct?
right.
So it's basically still hanging on to the current crop,
right,
and setting the potential for the new crop all kind of at the same time in June
correct,
and July.
Correct.
Right. And so then as those soil temperatures probably increase over 95 degrees, so when it's 115 outside, your soil temperature is probably 95 to 100 degrees.
I would say anywhere from 85 to 95, and that's extremely high for soil.
85 to 95 degrees is where you start to see more of this nutrient and water uptake restriction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the tree's not going to uptake much. And once you get beyond that on top, obviously the tree is really struggling to make or do its job to set the bud set for the following year. So I think that had a big impact on what we're seeing today.
So outside of the physiology stuff, right? So, okay, fine. It's hot. The ambient temperature, the air temperature, I think it's been referenced as, is at such a level that the tree isn't respirating, right? So It's not basically breathing. There's when I was reading here, there was called stomata, right? Which are the holes on the leaf that allow the tree basically to breathe.
Correct.
And at a certain air temperature, which is probably, I think it's 105 degrees, those stomata close.
Right.
So now the tree's not not breathing.
Respirating anymore.
It's not
right?
respirating.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's not respirating.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, that soil temperature is above 85 to 95 degrees. So that root system really isn't uptaking water or nutrients as well. So this tree, to your point, is really going into a survival mode.
Yes.
So maybe your bud differentiation starts flipping over from, fruiting or productive to more survival and leaf bud type of differentiation.
Right.
And that's really, I think, what we're seeing, right?
I think that holds true. And one of the biggest questions is, of course, in some of these buds, I've noticed some of the buds that you're usually used to seeing nice and plump and really, you're seeing a much smaller bud that, may not be viable. It remains to be seen. We're going to learn something this year, I think, based on what we see in the end result. But I'm very concerned, honestly, personally, that I think just looking around that I think a lot of this stuff and talking to growers all throughout the valley have mentioned a major problem with some of this stuff.
We should caveat this with not everything that we're seeing looks like this.
No, absolutely
right? There
not.
are definitely some, beautiful looking orchards that are going to set good crops.
Yes.
Right. There's also this marginal type stuff that we're seeing that has limited amount of flower buds.
Right.
What you would qualify as maybe lower quality buds.
Right.
And they're leafing out right now. That would be probably normal in a independence.
Right.
Where it looks like you're blooming and leafing out all at the same time. Mm-hmm. That's maybe characteristic of that variety. Mm-hmm. But in a non-pearl Monterey, Aldrich, or a Fritz, you don't really see that leaf bud really start pushing as early as you are now.
No, and you're seeing a lot of that already.
Yeah, right.
The tree's still flowering and it's already has leaves on it. So it's already, doing its thing. And the younger stuff looks really good. Fairly good. Butte Padres look very good. Your Independence, the younger trees look very well. Let's not get into varieties. I think some of these varieties can be very light. But I still think in general, anything above 10 years is really affected severely.
Let's talk about rootstocks then, right? So we keep talking about we've mentioned at least rootstocks that live within the first foot of soil. And we reference soil temperatures that could affect that.
Right.
So what has really led us to this conversation, or a little bit more of the research side of this, is the common theme that we keep hearing: trees or varieties that are on a Nemagard rootstock kind of consistently look weaker than those that are on a Hansen or some version of a hybrid.
That is true. Nemagard is more shallow rooted. So generally you're going to have higher temperatures in that higher area, where your hybrids are deeper rooted and they have more uptake possibilities because it's just a stronger root system that provides all the strength they need for the top. So I think all that has an effect in a lot of cases, and depending a lot on water scheduling and stuff like that. But even if you had a lot of water irrigation at the time, that didn't seem to make a difference.
The
really.
tree was shutting down.
The tree was shutting down, and it doesn't matter. If it can't uptake it, it doesn't matter if it's there.
Some of this is going to be hard for us to kind of parse through, right? Because if you look back, we think about 48% of the total standing acreage today is on a Nemagard or some sort of a peach almond hybrid rootstock.
Right.
Right. So a shallow rooted root system.
Right.
But that also is some of the older acreage in California.
Correct.
Right. So we're doing our best, right, with trying to identify why. But really, it could be age, or it could be rootstock, or a combination of shallow-rooted rootstock with some of these older trees.
It's absolutely a combination. You're talking 48% of any kind of peach rootstocks were the predominantly higher planted rootstocks, and of course the trees are older, so you have a bigger canopy, and you have a minimal root system there that is really doing the work. And I think all that has an effect. When you start getting into your Viking, your Bright's hybrid, Hansen, obviously those are much deeper rooted. They have a lot of almond blood in them, so they can tolerate stress slightly better than Nemagard. So that could make a big impact. And that's one of the reasons why in today's world, everybody plants hybrids now.
Right.
Because of, not only because of that, it's just better anchorage and healthier trees overall. And
that probably started in 2016. Like from a nursery perspective, you were doing much less Nemagard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Back in, I think in 16, 95% of what I was growing, it was still Nemagard. Wow. And then we actually kicked into our hybrids in 2017, and now we're 95% hybrids and 5% Nemagard. It's the opposite completely.
Yeah. So again, to kind of just recap what we're talking about is generally the bloom that you're seeing. I think there are some fantastic looking orchards. I think there's quite a big distribution that's in the middle that maybe is not exactly what you would like to be seeing.
Right.
And then on the other side, there are orchards that are pretty abysmal,
Yeah.
right? They're leafing out already. And so all we're trying to do with this is kind of, again, share our opinion about why we're seeing maybe a marginal bloom,
Right.
marginal quality
quality bloom and light bloom
Yeah.
in some of these varieties. And I mean, it could fool you. You can actually drive by an orchard on the edges and they look really good.
Right.
But the minute you walk into the field, it gives you a different story. So I think it's going to be all over the board. We don't know what that total outcome is going to be, but it's alarming to see and just talking to growers what they see. So we'll see what it brings to the table for the 25 crop.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Conrad. Thank you.
My pleasure, Mike.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.